Hey everybody, welcome to this week's post from my video blog, How to Build Thriving Teams. I'm Tim, and today we're going to talk about the 5 reasons why your communication is getting lost. See, communication is the cornerstone of every organization's ability to thrive. Studies have shown that in the last 5 years, organizations that had more effective internal and external communication had 40% higher returns than those organizations that had the least effective communication. See, it is vital, and I think intellectually we all get this, right? We all know how important communication is. Every leader, every presenter, every organization, I think, gets this, and there are a ton of resources out there about communication. I mean, there's an endless number of books. I've got a lot of them here. Tons of other resources out there. This blog post, for example. And there are going to continue to be tons of resources on communication because even though we have known for a really long time how important communication is, it's been even longer that we have struggled with it. And so today I want to talk about really just 5 main reasons why your communication is probably getting lost or is not as effective as it could be. And what I have found is that 95% of all our communication issues can be summed up in these 5 reasons that I'm about to give you. Now, there is endless nuance to individuals and organizations, especially as it relates to communication. But I honestly believe that everything can be broken down into this. There's either too many channels of communication, there's inconsistency, there's making assumptions, there is an overload of priorities, or there's a lack of understanding your audience. All of our communication issues, or virtually all of them, will come down to one of those 5 categories. So let's get into those a little bit more. All right, too many channels of communication. I mean, in this day and age, we've got emails, texts, we've got meetings and conference calls and message boards and group chats, all kinds of things. The list goes on and on and on. So organizations, I think, have made communication a little too complex. Now, I realize that if you're a large organization or if there are different facets to your organization, different channels of communication could be important. But what happens when there are so many is that the team can underuse, overuse, or misuse all those different channels of communication. See, the secret here is to simplify. So I want to challenge you to reevaluate all the different communication tools that you have. If you can get your channels of communication down to a minimum, 3 at the is really that kind of sweet spot, and that includes face-to-face communication. I think you'll find that your messages are going to get it through much more effectively. Your team will be able to understand and communicate more effectively, and the time frame for communication to reach the different areas of your organization will be much quicker. Simplicity begets clarity. And clarity begets productivity. And a baguette is a long French roll that's really delicious. All right, let's move on to making assumptions. So you've probably heard that old adage, assuming makes something out of you and me, right? Well, it's true. And, I learned that early on that one of the worst things I can do as a leader is to make assumptions. Making assumptions not only impacts your ability to effectively communicate, but it could also lead to the deterioration of the morale of your team. Now, what you need to do in order to keep from having to assume that your team or the organization has completely understood the communication you've given is to check for understanding. Now, for a lot of us, we're sort of programmed after we've said something or led a meeting, we might ask that question, right? Hey, does anyone have any questions? And nobody says anything, and so you make the assumption, okay, they have no questions, they must all have it down pat, and you send them on their way, and then you realize a few days later that they really didn't quite understand exactly what you wanted from them, and you're not getting the end result. That's the worst feeling in the world. So rather than that generic, hey, does anybody have any questions, a better way to check for understanding is to ask them to articulate back to you the message that you've given. Ask them to say, okay, hey, what is it then that we're going to do differently? Or hey, what are the three main goals that I just mentioned? Whatever that looks like, but asking for them to articulate it back gives you a better understanding than the generic, does anybody have any questions question. So that's the best way to keep from relying on assumptions, is to check for understanding. Now, the third reason is inconsistency. Inconsistency is the kryptonite of every organization. Now, that's a term that I've coined because I believe that with my whole heart. It's one of the worst things that a leader or an organization can do to their team, or even to their customers or their constituents, is just being inconsistent. In fact, the Change Element, which I'm a part of, we have our own podcast show. You should check it out. It's the Change Element podcast show. You can find it on iTunes. And we did a whole episode on inconsistency, and it's called Kryptonite. And we really explore this further. And so I encourage you to check that out. But see, inconsistency can kill an organization, and it kills effective communication as well. Now, most organizations will have best practices, but maybe a lot of times they don't actually get practiced. And if you haven't set those up for yourself, that's what I would encourage you to do to help you with inconsistency, is to create some best practices. Best practices are your friend. They're called best practices because they're the best way of doing things. And so if you set clear expectations for your team, for your organization, about how communication tools will be used, when they'll be used, and what will be communicated, you will find that consistency really leads to greater productivity, better effectiveness, and keeps people moving at a rate in which you want them to move. So using those best practices or creating best practices will help you eliminate the problem of inconsistency. Now, the fourth reason why your communication may be getting lost is priority overload. See, when everything is important, nothing is important. See, as human beings, we do have a limited capacity to handle multiple things at once. And I know there's some of you out there that really pride yourself on being a multitasker. And that's great that you're able to, maybe manage different things at once, but our minds really aren't built for it. And there's no way that we can give to one thing while giving to so many other things. It's just beyond our abilities, even though we spend so much of our days trying. So as a leader, as someone who is trying to really work on their communication or make it more effective, it's so important that you really focus on the priorities and how to really force rank the different goals and objectives, or the information that you want your team to take away. If you start to tell your team about one specific point, but then you start bringing in all this other peripheral information, other points, other goals and objectives that maybe aren't immediately relevant to that conversation, what can happen is your message starts to get lost. So you want to try to simplify your message and prioritize it. And the other thing is I realize that for organizations or businesses, there always are a ton of priorities. I've never sat on a conference call where there wasn't like 15 priorities given out in like the first 10 minutes. So I understand that you can't just say like, we'll just limit it to 1, 2, or 3 things. I know there's a lot more going on. But what you can do for yourself and for your team is use some kind of prioritizing or ranking system to help your team understand what is most important and the order of importance. And there's lots of ways to do that. You can number things, you can color code certain things. I know that's a really popular way of doing it. Everything there's like the red category, which is like the most urgent and important. There's orange, which is urgent but not important, and yellow, which is important but not urgent. And so there's different ways to do that, and there's some very effective ways. But finding that way of prioritizing what is most important, what information, goals, or objectives are most important, is going to help you in the long run, and it helps you sort of formulate your communication in a way that the right messages get through in the order that they should. So really prioritizing force ranking and simplifying really all the information that's being given to a team is going to help make your communication more effective. All right, the fifth reason that your communication may be getting lost is because you don't know your audience. You may think you know your audience, but you just might not. See, individuals all perceive the world very differently, and we have different social, cultural, educational, environmental backgrounds, and psychological factors too that really see things and perceive things completely different. I may hear a message and take something completely different away from the person next to me who heard that exact same message. And see, as one who really relies on effective communication, whether you're leading a team, an organization, or perhaps you make a living off of speaking, it's so important to know your audience. Because when you know your audience, you can tailor your message. So how do you know your audience? I mean, in this digital age, right, we've got tons of different tools and technology to help us learn more about the people we're trying to serve, right? But what I have found is that the single best way to know your audience is purely just to listen. Ask questions and listen. Now, for those of you that are leading a team or an organization, really you have no excuse to not know your audience. And if you don't have a great pulse for who your audience is and what it is they value and what's relative to them, then shame on you. But you can fix that still by asking questions and listening, having more conversations and just hearing what are the things that are important to them and what things are relevant for them. And when you ask them about their role in your organization, just ask them to talk about it. How do they see their role? That will give you incredible insight to know how to effectively communicate to those individuals in the future. So listening is a great way to better understand your audience. So when you do that, you can tailor, to understand your audience. And when you understand your audience, you can tailor your message. So tailoring your message to the different or varied audiences will help you communicate so much more effectively. The messages that you need to get across will be understood. You'll start to use less words and less information and really be able to hone in on what the specific audience needs to hear and when. And that really this ability to understand your audience and to tailor your message, it really equips you with those tools that you need to sharpen that communication even more and keep your team moving in the direction you need them to move. So understand your audience, tailor your message is a great way to really circumvent this obstacle or this barrier that we face of not knowing our audience. All right, that's it for this week. I know it's kind of a lot, but hey, go through these 5 reasons. Do a self-check about your own communication and see where your communication maybe could become more effective by really focusing on these 5 things. Hey, if you have any comments or questions, please leave those. I would love to hear from you. At my website, TimBartlett.me/blog, you can subscribe to these blogs as well, where you'll get these posts in your inbox every week. If you're watching this anywhere else, like Facebook, please share it, like it, leave a comment there. I would love to hear from you. And if you're interested in seeking out help, if you want to see coaching for yourself as a leader or consulting for your organization and how to really build a thriving team culture, please reach out to me. Go to TimBartlett.me and you'll see a link there for contact, or you can do TimBartlett.me/contact. Fill out that form and I'll get right back to you. All right, so until then, take care.